Hello, everyone. I'm Sonora Dariadel, your host. I would like to first thank our viewers, and I would like to personally thank our members at Hospice and End of Life Care Group. This would not be possible without any of you. Thank you all for making this happen and helping raise awareness. Today, I have a special guest. Her name is Rebekah Reineke, and Rebekah has kindly accepted to be interviewed, or actually to share her testimony with the rest of us about how she's come through or how she copes with her loss grief. Also, a little bit more about Rebekah. She works for Living Well Mindful Trauma Recovery and Wellness. And also, she is a host for a program on healing and insight with focus on addiction for Worldwide Institute. Rebekah, I'd like to say hello and welcome.
Hi, Sonora. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
I appreciate the work you do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think especially in light of, the things going on in the world, I really, I used a lot of my loss to help other people who deal with grief and loss and trauma, and that's a lot how I dealt with coping and with my own healing was by doing service work for other people. I think that's really what helped in my own healing. I think the first loss that I had was of my maternal grandmother. She raised me, and my parents were very religious, and they disowned me when I was a teenager. And then my grandma started to pass away, and so they when she did finally, I was like 20 something. My mom told me it was all my fault, and I carried that with me. In a way, I mean, I up until recent years, I held that with me that my mom blamed me for that, and after that, then I turned to I turned to addiction to cope with difficult feelings because I had a history of sexual abuse and other trauma, and I ended up in rehab, and my parents came to visit me, and they were like, the rehab told them, I think the problem is your religion. And they were like, oh, it's totally not that. You don't know what you're talking about. And so they like took me out. And the day I got out was on Thanksgiving, and I was going to drive. I lived in Wisconsin, and I was going to drive up north to visit my grandma for Thanksgiving. And she, they had given me a bottle of Suboxone, and I was still very much in my addiction then, and I took the whole bottle, and so I was way too messed up to drive, and so I was like, okay, well, I'll go the next morning. I started out right at like 4 in the morning. I started driving up to northern Wisconsin, and about 5 in the morning, I got a phone call from my dad saying that my grandma had died. And so, I really beat myself up for a long time about that too. Why had I made that decision? Why did that have to happen? Why this, why that? So
Rebekah, I'm sorry. May I ask you a question? How long ago did the passing of your grandmother or the death of your grandmother?
So my first grandmother died when I was, I think about like 20, and the second one was about 22, and so I'm 35
so how many years
now.
Ago?
So I'm 36 now, and I've had 12 people total pass away since then, 12 or 13.
Well, that's definitely a lot of loss. I mean, yeah. I hear they come in threes, but but you've had your share, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the major one after that was my mom. My mom got pulmonary fibrosis, and she
Mm.
started dying, and I was still in my addiction. I was stealing pain medicine from her, even as she was, dying.
Mhm.
It was not a good sight, But
Yeah.
I was living with him at the time because we knew she didn't have a lot of time. But she was in hospice, which gave me towards the end, which gave me a really big appreciation for palliative care and end of life care because she really was at peace. And what was really hard for me was is that I hung on with her next to her bed for days because I wanted to be there with her. But finally, I was exhausted, and so I went home. And the next morning, I woke up to a call from my aunt saying that she had passed away. And for years, I was like, why did she have to pass away when I wasn't there? But I've done a lot of research and understanding better into death and dying, and a lot of times when there's a difficulty within a relationship between, especially family members, the person that's passing, feels the need to let go at a time that difficult
Mhm.
relationship isn't in the room with them, and there isn't that
Mhm.
space being held, or it's really for a reason. There's a reason behind
It's
it.
really interesting. It's really interesting. I just remembered another individual who shared the same thing and said that she also finds that they let go when they choose to go. They let go, and I personally, through my training and experience, I have noticed that is true.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you on that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. After that, it was really rough for me. I tried to commit suicide. I was in a coma for about 4 days. I had kind of like a near-death experience. I wasn't in my body, and when I came back into it, I'd never been so angry. But I, re- I stayed living with my father for a few years, and we had a really difficult relationship. And I finally realized, I couldn't live a life of drugs and just chaos anymore. And so an opportunity arose. I had had a difficult relationship with an individual for years. It was abusive, but um, we had planned to move to Seattle years earlier, and it didn't work out. But he was now living in Seattle, and so I decided to move to Seattle and be with him. And the first year was really rough. He was dying of Crohn's disease and cancer. Um, and so we were both still very much in our addiction. He was an alcoholic. He was, if you've ever seen the movie like Black Hawk Down, he was one of the Army Rangers that was in Somalia when the Black Hawks went down, and so he had really bad PTSD from
Yes.
that, and so he used alcohol to deal with that. But he got
So I'm sorry. So I see how you're mentioning these different and how each one copes with grief differently. Some turn
Mhm.
to drugs, some turn to alcohol, or some turn to suicide, some turn to um, grief counseling. Some don't even take that into
Mhm.
consideration. Me being one of them, you know. I
Mhm.
totally pushed it aside because I felt like, who's going to say anything that's going to change anything?
Mhm.
So I think that's a really interesting aspect. I think that's a good point that you bring up about all the different people that have had different ways of coping mechanisms,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
not to be judged at all whatsoever, because we all have a different way of
Right.
coping
For sure.
with trauma,
Each
grief.
experience is different. Each person's experience is definitely different. That's something I've
Absolutely.
learned, and I was very much stuck in trying to escape my feelings and not feel what was happening around me.
Mhm.
Um, he and I finally got sober. We were sober for a month together, and I woke up one morning and he was dead. And that was incredibly heartbreaking for me. I was just really messed up in the head for a very long time. Um, but he had introduced me to Buddhism,
Mhm.
and he was a big follower of this author Noah Levine's, and so I read this book, Dharma Punks, and it really got me into the idea of sobriety and recovery and mindfulness and loving kindness and compassion for oneself and forgiveness
Yes.
and all these ideas that I had never thought of. And the fact that there's something, that there's suffering, that all this stuff that I'd been experiencing, there was a word for it, and it was suffering, and it made so much sense to me. And so I,
So I'm sorry again.
yeah,
So just to get a clear understanding. So your coping mechanism after having tried several different kinds eventually came through a book.
yeah, yeah, it came through a book. And then I had written Noah to tell him how appreciative I was, because his father, Stephen Levine, who recently passed away, had
Yes.
been teaching this year to live practice, and my boyfriend, who had died, had been doing that because he knew he only had less than a year to live. So he was,
Right.
living it like it was his last, because there really was. And so I wrote Noah, and Noah and I have been in contact ever since. He told me about this place called Dharma Punks, or this group called Dharma Punks, and I started attending it in Seattle, and I got into the meditation community here in Seattle, which is really supportive. We're really blessed to have what we have
Yeah.
here. It's not, there's a lot of places that aren't like that,
Yeah.
and but in the midst of all that. After he passed away, right after that, I think it was about 2000. Yeah, it was a couple of years. I met my fiance, and he helped change my life for the better. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today without him. So it's been wonderful
Mhm.
with him. But then in 2013, the beginning of that, a friend of mine who I had kind of a romantic relationship with, and we had a difficult relationship after some things. He committed suicide, and he was also an addict, and he had overdosed.
So we call that traumatic. That we call that traumatic death
Mhm,
when we lose someone due to suicide.
mhm,
Um, okay,
mhm,
that's really hard to break through.
mhm. Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
difficult. And then my dad died then later that year, of a heart attack, and he and I had still struggled with a difficult relationship, so that was very hard to cope with. The funny thing
Hmm.
is for years he was like, "Oh, you're never getting anything when I die, so you better not be nice to me. There's no reason to be nice to me. You're never getting anything when I die." And he and my mom left me some money so that I could, I have a lot of trauma that I hold in my body. I was in a ton of car accidents just from a lot of different factors. And so now I use that to get holistic treatment to help repair my body, because I feel I hold that grief and that trauma in my body, and I need to get
Yes.
that self-care. That is part of the healing process, is getting that self-care in that.
I'd say you're doing a great job at
I'm
it.
trying. Then I guess, let's see what happened. The next year in 2014, the beginning of it, I had a very best friend. He and I were old. He and I used to party a lot together, and he was my very best friend. We'd been friends for years and years and years, and I loved him so much. And he died of an overdose as well. So he was back in Wisconsin. He had this cat, this big fat cat that we have now, named Dinah, and she was going to get put to sleep. And so I was ever the more determined, because he called her his little bodhisattva, and just was all about this kitty. And so I went all the way to Wisconsin, and we used every penny we had, and I got the help of some friends to go save this cat and go to his funeral. And it was a really amazing
losing a
experience.
pet losing a pet is really
Hmm.
painful. thank goodness I haven't been through that yet. I mean, but I do have one.
Oh,
But I hear from many
yeah, it
individuals
is.
how hard it is because they're so pure and so loving.
Yeah, that's what was really hard for me when I was a teenager because I had all these pets and my parents
Mhm.
were like, "No, you can't see your pets. You either have to come home and be our religion or you can't ever see your pets again." And then that's just terrible to do to a child. I mean,
Yes.
it's a horrible thing to do. But so now we have Dinah, and she has this the spirit of my best friend in her so much. They're so similar. It's like having him here, and he had been planning to move to Seattle. So in a way, his little kitty spirit got it and made his way here. So and I find that even though death is a sad thing that we deal with, it brings the people that are left behind a lot closer, and their spirit lives on through those relationships
Mhm.
and through the memory. And I believe what Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, that something can never become nothing, that
Mhm.
energy lives on. I'm
Yeah,
a firm believer in that. Um,
I believe in that too.
I do some things that are probably outside the norm. Talking to spirits sometimes and things like that. Using
That's
pendulums and things like that. And
that's
I've
wonderful.
taught people how to
I
do
think that's
that.
beautiful. Good for you.
So
You're a man of all trades.
I try to
Good
keep
job.
myself open to everything.
Well,
So
yeah. I can sense that open energy in you, and I really appreciate that. It's beautiful.
thanks. But I
Mhm.
guess like a year ago, a friend of mine who I'd also known. It's funny because all these close friends that I knew at the exact same time back when I was in my early 20s, they all died in the last few years. There was all the people that I was super close to. They all died, um, and he died of an issue regarding his heart as well. And it, it's ironic, all these heart
Yeah.
related or addiction issues that are keep being a running theme in my life. And I have to take that into account, that a lot of that is I've put a lot of people through a lot of heartache and a lot of heartbreak, and I have to take responsibility for that. And because of that, I have changed my intention on and things. And when I changed my intention from being entirely self-focused and
Mhm.
just thinking of myself, which is what most addicts do. They're most like, but
Yeah.
what about me? How am I going to get rid of this feeling? And I can't deal with how I'm feeling, so I need to think about me. When I started doing service work and helping others, my boyfriend Will and I started a mindful grief and loss group to try to help individuals with using Stephen Levine books, Unattended Sorrow, and we would help people who had experienced any kind of grief or loss. And
So, Rebekah, one moment. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to get to that because I was going to actually ask you a few questions about your work. But before we move on to that, let me just close the subject of grief and loss. How much loss you've had to cope with and go through. And what would you have to say to those of us who are going through the grieving process? Do you have anything that you would like to share that could perhaps help us or deal with our grief or soon to be grief? Everyone, I know a lot of people who are going through a very difficult time right now, and I just wanted to know if you have a word of advice for them
Mhm.
or for all of us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't let anybody tell you how you should feel. And don't let anybody ever tell you they understand how you feel. But do let them say that, because you are going to have people that are going to say, "Oh, I totally understand how you feel." Nobody but
Yeah,
you understands how you feel.
absolutely.
And uh, but you have to let people be there for you, and you have to have community, and you have to let that support in. You cannot deal with grief alone, whether you look for it on an online community, whether you look for it at a local support system. We're, I know in a lot of places we're really blessed to have those kind of support systems, and that's something I'm trying to work on with this program that I'm helping to create for. That's, trauma is a very inclusive term. It includes everything that's going on in the world. We all have trauma that's happened to us that gets ingrained in our somatic experience, no matter what. And so there are a lot of great people doing great work, and realize that this is something that is being worked on by professionals, by people who have had the experience, such as myself, and that there's change in the air, and that there is hope, that you don't need to have hopelessness, and the very last thing you should ever do is take your life because of grief, because though these feelings might seem unbearable, everything is impermanent, and if you can just feel that feeling just for the second, and just realize it's just a passing feeling, it'll be okay. Just hold it for that moment. It'll be okay.
Thank you. Well, Rebekah, thank you so much. So we have about 2 minutes left, and for all of our watchers, members, supporters of our cause, I'd like to thank everyone on board on Journey, Care, and Legacy. And thank you, Hospice and End of Life Care Group. Every single one of you has contributed. I would also like to introduce Rebekah to you as part of our board. She has joined our board of directors, and I'm so happy to have you on board, Rebekah.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
I look forward to working with you. And Rebekah also does work with palliative and end of life care, because loss is not always due to a death, but it is due to many other things. Am I correct, Rebekah?
Yeah, I work with people with. I'm working with a senator here in Washington to deal with pain management for individuals. Wow. Because there's a difference between people that deal with pain management for pain care, palliative care, and the addiction crisis we have going on in America. Yes. So I'm trying to work with that. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sonora, for your work too.
Thank you. You're welcome. It's my pleasure. I think the work you do is very important in terms of pain management. That is a huge issue that we're all facing nationwide. I mean, the war on opiates and what happens to the rest of us who have issues with pain, put into this, group of people who are not trying to abuse painkillers, but we actually have conditions that we need the painkillers for. So I appreciate that work you do, and I think it adds a lot to what we do. And I really, really thank you for your time and for sharing and being so open and sharing so much of yourself with us. And that shows a lot of love and care. And I'm so proud to have you on board. And it was such a pleasure speaking with you, Rebekah.
Thank you so much, Sonora. Thank you for everything.
You're welcome. I hope to see you again shortly.
Oh, I'm sure. Okay.
You take care out in Washington. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.